Good morning. The reading today is from Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asa, Asa the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Jehoram, Jehoram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amon, Amon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abihud, Abihud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Achim, Achim the father of Elihud, Elihud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Thus there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. The word of the Lord.
My father was a lifelong atheist and a fierce critic of organized religion. Between the time that I became a Christian at age 30 and between the time that he passed away in 2014, we had many conversations about many things, music, literature, philosophy, but also conversations about God and Jesus and the gospel and what the gospel is and what truth is and whether truth is even accessible. 2 weeks before my dad died, we had another conversation in the hospital. He had just gotten off the ventilator, so we knew that the situation was serious. We were alone in the room, and I asked my dad, "Dad, have you ever considered the possibility that the gospel you've rejected isn't really the gospel?" In a moment of real honesty, he said, "I've thought about that." And I asked him, "Well, Dad, would you think about it again?" And he said, "Son, I promise you I will." Sometimes we can think we know what something is, but we don't, not really. For many of us, Christianity is like that, especially the Christmas story, baby Jesus in a manger, shepherds tending their flocks by night. Or this passage, it sounds like it's just a long list of names. Some of you started falling asleep just listening to it. Sometimes we can think we know what something is. It's so familiar that we think we know what it is. So for instance, maybe you grew up in church, but you rejected it. Or maybe you're seriously questioning aspects of Christianity. Or maybe you didn't grow up in church. I didn't. And yet to you, the gospel feels irrelevant at best, or at worst, harmful and oppressive. But whatever your case may be, have you ever considered the possibility that the gospel you've rejected isn't really the gospel? Or maybe you did grow up in church. Maybe you've always identified as a Christian. But the same danger exists for you. The gospel becomes so familiar, we stop seeing it for what it is. One of the biggest challenges for all of us then, especially at Christmas, is to stand back far enough to begin to see the gospel again for what it really is. And if we do that, we find out that the gospel is far more shocking and challenging than we ever dared imagine, but also far more comforting and transformative. How? Over the next few weeks, we're looking at the Christmas story as told by the gospel writer Matthew. Beginning with the first verse, Matthew begins rearranging our categories and challenging our assumptions about what the gospel really is. So let's look at this passage and see three things this morning. The gospel affirms our longings, it challenges our assumptions, and finally, it fulfills our hopes. The gospel affirms our longings, challenges our aspirations, and fulfills our hopes. Okay? First, the gospel affirms our longings. Matthew begins his gospel with a long genealogy that goes all the way back to Abraham. Now, the first thing we need to understand about this is that in the ancient world, genealogies were like your resume. In our modern individualistic culture, what really matters is your personal accomplishments. But in the ancient world, and still today in many traditional societies, what matters is not your individual accomplishments, it's your family. Your genealogy is a way of saying, this is who I am. This is why you should take me seriously. So who is Jesus? Well, first, notice it says that Jesus is the son of David. Now, David was the great hero king of Israel. He conquered Israel's enemies. He established the nation. And especially, God made a famous promise to Abraham that one day, one of his descendants, a son of David, would reign as king forever over the whole earth. He would conquer all evil forever. And he would establish a kingdom on earth where there's no more war, violence, poverty, sickness, suffering, or even death. It would be a world made new. Matthew is saying Jesus is that king. But second, Jesus is the son of Abraham. Now, this is going back even farther in Israel's history. God made another equally famous promise to Abraham that through his offspring, all of the nations of the world would be blessed. It was a universal promise of blessing, not just for Israel, not just for one nation, but for all the nations of the world. You put all of this together, and here's what you've got. Throughout the Bible, God's vision is a multi-ethnic, multicultural vision of rescue and renewal for all the world. It's the end of evil. It's peace among the nations. It's a world made new. By the time Jesus showed up, Jewish people had been waiting for thousands of years for this to happen. They were waiting. They were longing for it. Here's the point for this first point. We long for it too. Only in our modern world, we call it progress. Progress is the idea that we can make the world a better place through things like science, technology, politics, freedom, democracy, and human rights. But here's the thing. If you study history, you find out that throughout human history, people did not see the world in terms of progress. They saw history as a never-ending cycle of birth, suffering, and death. You see this in Eastern traditions. It's called the karmic cycle. You see this in ancient mythology. You see this in ancient Greek philosophy. You see it everywhere in the ancient world. History is a never-ending hamster wheel going around and around. Birth, suffering, death, wash, rinse, repeat. In that vision, there is no making the world a better place. There is no progress. There is no changing the wheel. In that vision, the best you can hope is to escape the wheel. But along comes the Bible with this radically different story that says history is not a wheel going around and around. It's a story of rescue and renewal. The place we get our modern vision of progress is from the Bible. A lot of people would say, well, that's ridiculous. Our modern idea of progress, that comes from the Enlightenment, when we rejected religious superstition and we embraced things like reason and science. That's a popular story, but it's a myth. And there are countless historians and philosophers who are constantly pointing it out. For instance, John Gray is an English philosopher who's written several well-known books. He's also an atheist. He does not believe in Christianity. He thinks Christianity is a myth. But look at what he says in one of his books. Until the rise of Christianity, a cyclical view of history was taken for granted. When religion began to be replaced by secular creeds, he's talking about the Enlightenment, the Christian myth of history as a redemptive drama was not abandoned. It was renewed in another guise. A story of redemption through divine providence was replaced by one of progress through the collective efforts of humanity. Think about it. We long for a world where good triumphs over evil, don't we? We long for a world that is set free from war, violence, poverty, racism, disease. We long for a world where we can escape death through medical and scientific advances. We long for that world, and all of our stories and movies and fantasies and TV shows are constantly tapping into that longing. So for instance, watch Lord of the Rings, or better yet, read the books. Read the books. Look at the elves. There is a deep sadness that haunts their existence in Middle-earth because elves are immortal. Therefore, elves remember a world untouched by evil. They remember the world as it once was, but now the shadows of darkness have grown long, and that world seems so far away. And yet everything inside of them longs for that world. So in the first book, there's a place where the elven queen of Lothlorien, Galadriel, is bidding farewell to Frodo as he goes back on his quest, almost certainly to death and ruin. And when she says goodbye to him, she sings this incredibly sad song. Here's how part of it goes. Beyond the sun, beyond the moon, the foam was on the sea. And by the strand of Ilmarinen, there grew a golden tree. There long the golden leaves have grown upon the branching years, while here, beyond the sundering seas, now fall the elven tears. Oh, Lorien, the winter comes, the bare and leafless day. The leaves are falling in the stream. The river flows away. It's so sad. Everything golden is fallen. Everything good is flowing away. But they remember that world and they long for it. Friends, listen, we're all elves in a way, because even though we live in a dark, dark world, there's an immortal memory trace inside of us that remembers the garden. We remember the golden tree. We remember a world untouched by evil, and everything inside of us longs for that world. Here's why this is so important. That longing exists in us because that world exists. We were created for it. The problem is that modern secularism has forgotten the story that tells us about that world. Modern secularism wants the world at the heart of the biblical story, but not the God who tells the story. Modern secularism wants the world at the heart of the biblical story, but not the God who tells the story. Have you ever seen a bolt of lightning so big that it lights up the whole sky? It's pretty awesome when that happens. Far from being a boring list of names, this genealogy in the very first page of the New Testament is like a shaft of lightning lighting up the darkness of our world with the startling announcement that the king we all long for has finally come to bring about the world we all long for. And that leads to our next point. The gospel affirms our longings. It also challenges our assumptions, though. Remember, in the ancient world, genealogies were there to say, here's why this person matters. Here's why you should take this person seriously. So look at Jesus' genealogy. You've got all these impressive names. the patriarchs, the founders of Israel. You've got rulers and kings of the nations. Very impressive names, and that's the point of genealogies. You're supposed to be impressed. But there are some very shocking surprises in this genealogy. First of all, 5 of the people here are women. In the ancient world, women were basically second-class citizens. They were considered the property of men. You wouldn't put a woman in your genealogy if you wanted people to take you seriously, but Jesus puts them in his genealogy. Second, 4 out of these 5 women are non-Jewish. They're Gentiles who were despised by Jewish people. So, for instance, Tamar was a Canaanite. Rahab was a Jerichoite. Ruth was a Moabite. Even Bathsheba, by the way, she doesn't actually get named in this genealogy. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. But Bathsheba, she was the wife of a Hittite. Do you see what's going on? In this genealogy, you have gender outsiders. You have racial outsiders. On top of that, you have moral outsiders. Tamar dressed up like a prostitute and seduced her father-in-law Judah in order to get a child. That child was the product of deception and incest. Or Rahab was a prostitute. And even Solomon, the great King Solomon, was the child. He was the result of an adulterous affair between David and Bathsheba. Man, you look at this genealogy and all the wrong people are here. Gender outsiders, racial outsiders, moral outsiders. This is shocking in the ancient world because there were all these places in the Old Testament law that said, well, these are the people that they can't come into the temple, they can't come into worship. Canaanites and Moabites, incest, prostitution, adultery. These are people that should be excluded from the presence of God. And yet when they show up in this genealogy, it's a way of saying Jesus includes them in the presence of God. He doesn't exclude them, he welcomes them. He's proud to call them his own. But there's something even more shocking in this genealogy. I mentioned just a bit ago that Bathsheba doesn't even get her own name here. Instead, verse 6 says, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. On the surface, it could sound like this is snubbing Bathsheba, like she doesn't even get a name. We're going to define this woman by her relationship to her husband. But it's not snubbing Bathsheba. This is actually snubbing David. Remember, David is one of the most important people in the history of Israel. David is so important that another term for Messiah was son of David. If you want one name in your genealogy, this is the name you want. No one was more important than David. No name was more impressive to have in your genealogy than the name of David. Matthew, when he talks about Solomon, he could have just said, well, his mother was Bathsheba and left everything alone. But by saying Uriah's wife, he's forcing us to remember one of the most awful, sordid, horrible, and embarrassing stories in the whole Bible. Who was Uriah? Uriah was one of David's best friends, and he was also one of the most devoted, committed officers in David's army. And yet, David essentially abducted Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, got her pregnant, and then had Uriah killed in order to cover the whole thing up. Yes, David was a great king, but he was also a sexual predator and a murderer. When Matthew says Uriah's wife, he's proclaiming as loudly as he possibly can that the person we think should be better than everyone else is actually far worse than everyone else. The very first page of the New Testament is like a headline front page announcement about the main theme of the gospel, that nobody, and I mean nobody, gets into the presence of God because of your accomplishments or your performance. You don't come into the presence of God because of your religious performance or your moral performance or your spiritual performance or your career performance or your social activist performance or any other kind of performance. The only way you come into the presence of God is by sheer grace. This is challenging our deepest assumptions about who God is and how you connect to God. Because what is grace? Grace means that it doesn't matter how bad you are, but it also doesn't matter how good you are. You can't fail your way out of the presence and love of God, but neither can you perform your way in to the presence and love of God. Everybody is welcome at this king's table because who do you see here? Both David and Tamar. Both David and Rahab. You've got kings and you've got prostitutes. In fact, this king is worse than the prostitutes. Grace demolishes the pride that keeps us thinking that we're so much better than others. In fact, if you think you're better than others, then you're actually far more lost than the people you think you're so much better than. Let me offer you just a couple of brief applications for this. First, grace changes the way we see others. We all know that there is so much more political hatred, contempt, and division in our world than we've ever seen before. We're so used to looking around us and looking at other people, other groups, other belief systems, other political parties, and saying, well, they're what's really wrong with the world. And if we were to just wipe them out, then the world would be the place it's supposed to be because they're not just wrong, they're evil. Grace demolishes that idea because grace means that the real enemy that needs to be destroyed is not other people. It's the evil that's destroying us and other people. So far from hating and condemning others, the more you see that you need grace just as much, if not more, than anybody else, the more you realize that instead of hating and condemning others, you start praying and weeping for them. By the way, this doesn't mean that we fail to confront injustice in the world. This doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable. It does mean that instead of longing for people's exclusion and condemnation, we're longing for their redemption and their inclusion, and we're praying for that. Jesus wasn't just better, he was infinitely holy and righteous and good. If anybody could say, I am better than anybody else in the world, it was Jesus. And yet on the cross, Jesus prayed, and he wept for the people who nailed him to the cross. How much more should we be weeping and praying for people that we think they're our enemies? Grace changes the way we see others. But second, grace changes the way we see ourselves. Remember the names in this genealogy. It's full of names. Thousands of years later, we're reading these people's names. Would you like to have your name remembered thousands of years from now? What an honor. We think, how impressive, but why are their names here? Why are their names in this genealogy? It's not because of their accomplishments. It's not because of their performance. It's because of their relationship to Jesus. When you become a Christian, it gives you a new identity. It gives you a new name. So that now, instead of being defined by your accomplishments, by your performance, and, by the way, instead of being defined maybe by your failures, now you're defined by your relationship to Jesus. Do you realize what this does for you? This is the antidote to all the anxiety you feel that keeps you awake at night, worrying about what people said about you or what people might think about you. This is the exit ramp from that performative treadmill we're all on that keeps us exhausted and hurrying and rushing around trying to impress people with our accomplishments and our performance. And this is the freedom that from all of the ways that we medicate and numb ourselves with alcohol, drugs, sex, screens, pornography, pornography, whatever you use to medicate and soothe the pain of your story, a story that didn't turn out the way you hoped it would. And that leads to our last point. The gospel affirms our longings. Second, it challenges our assumptions. But third, the gospel fulfills our hopes. Remember that Jewish people had been waiting for thousands of years for the Messiah. They'd been waiting, but they had never seen an answer to their hopes. Matthew emphasizes this, especially at the end of this passage. The last verse says, thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 more from the exile to the Messiah. People often ask, what's the significance of these numbers? What does that mean? Matthew's, there's three sets of 14 generations. What's that all about? Well, there are different views on this. I would say nobody really knows for sure, but I think the view that's most compelling is the one that points out that in the Bible, 7 is the number of completion and perfection. So Matthew gives us 3 sets of 14. Do a little math and you realize, okay, that's 6 sevens, but what Matthew is saying is that Jesus is the 7th 7. Jesus is the completion and the perfection and the fulfillment of the whole story. I think that's what Matthew is telling us. But even if that's not exactly what he's saying, he is telling us that Jesus is the fulfillment of the story. He is telling us that all these years people have been waiting and hoping and longing and never seeing the answer to their hopes, that Jesus has come and fulfilled all of the hopes. And listen, this isn't just a fancy little trick with numbers. This meets us right where we live. Because remember, Jewish people have been waiting for thousands of years for their hopes to come true, and they never saw the answer to their hope. Have you ever felt like you've been waiting and longing for your hopes to come true? Hoping for a new world that never seems to arrive at our doorstep? The genealogy shows us that God always keeps his promises. It's not going to happen on your timeline. It's certainly not going to happen the way you expect. But God always keeps his promises. And the way we can trust that is because the gospel is not a myth. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a fantasy movie. For instance, at the beginning of this passage, Matthew doesn't say, once upon a time. He doesn't say, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. This is not a tale from Middle Earth or Wakanda. The very first verse says, this is the genealogy of Jesus. Everything here is rooted in history. Here's why this makes such a big difference in our lives. Think about your own life. We've been waiting and longing and hoping for a world made new, waiting and longing and hoping for the world to become a better place. We're constantly longing for that. Do you ever feel like you've been waiting and hoping and longing and it never really comes true? The gospel is a promise that God always keeps his promises. It means that the king really has come to conquer evil for all time. And one day this king is going to come again to make all things new. And the reason we can trust in that is because Jesus proved it by dying on a cross and rising from the dead in history. Do you realize this? There is no hope like that hope. It's so easy for us to feel like, well, hope means essentially wishful thinking. Hope means ignoring reality because the real world isn't like that. The real world will crush you. The real world will devour your dreams and spit out the bones. But the Bible gives us a radically different kind of hope. It doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means paying attention to reality, that Jesus rose from the dead. He was crucified. This happened in history. This is a radically different kind of hope. For instance, I read an essay a few years ago in the New York Times by a professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan named Scott Hershevitz. Scott Hershevitz describes himself as a Jewish atheist, and he says in the essay that, I don't believe in God, but I do go to synagogue. Why? Listen to how he puts it. He says, because pretending makes the world a better place. Think about the delight kids take in Santa Claus, even those who know deep down that he's not real. Pretending makes the world more magical and meaningful. Think about what he's saying. If there is no God, this world really is empty. Magic and meaning, those things aren't real. They're imaginary. But if we pretend, we can make the world more magical and meaningful. You know, if there is no God, I think this is about as good a response as any. Hope means ignoring reality and pretending that our elvish longings are true, even though we know they're not. But the Bible gives us a radically different kind of hope. Biblical hope, gospel hope, doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means paying closer attention to reality. It means that our elvish longings are infinitely more true and beautiful than we ever could have dared imagine. And the reason we can trust in that is because Jesus did not die a pretend death on a pretend cross. He died a real death on a real cross with real blood, real wood, real nails. When Jesus died on the cross, he was crushed by all the evil of the world so that we could be set free from all the evil. This is not pretend. It's not a myth. This happened in history, and we can pay attention to that. And when Jesus rose from the dead, it wasn't with a pretend body from a pretend tomb. Jesus got out of the real tomb with a real body, and the people who saw him, their lives really were changed. And we know the reason their lives were changed is because the world we live in today is really a different world. Because of that, the more we pay attention to that, the more we get a real hope. That even though we're still waiting for a world made new, the King is coming. We can trust this King. We can hold on. You know, one of the Narnia books is called Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian, in that book, the kingdom of Narnia is thousands of years old by now. And at this point in their history, hardly anyone anymore remembers, much less believes, all the old stories about Aslan the lion, who's really Jesus, or the old kings and queens of old like Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. Instead, Narnia has become full of bloodshed and treachery. So Prince Caspian, his uncle Miraz, killed Caspian's father in order to get the throne for himself. And now he's about to kill Caspian because Caspian is the rightful heir to the throne. So Caspian escapes, and he ends up finding some old Narnians who've been living all these years in hiding. And they agree to help Caspian wage war against his uncle Miraz and get the kingdom of Narnia back for true Narnia. But when they go into battle, they start losing badly. Battle after battle, they're being defeated. And at one point, in desperation, they decide to blow the ancient horn of Queen Susan. Legend says that whoever blows this horn shall have strange help. Who knows how strange? Maybe it will call back the old kings and queens. Maybe it will call even Aslan himself. So they blow the horn, and nothing happens. Hours go by, no help. Days go by, still no help. So a dwarf named Nickabrick, he's finally fed up with it. He says, okay, Caspian, we tried it your way. There is no Aslan. There's no help coming. Now we're going to do things my way. But there's a badger named Truffle Hunter. Good old badgers. He says the help will come. I stand by Aslan. We beasts, we do not change. We hold on. The help will come. It may be even now standing at the door, but Nickabrick isn't having any of it. In a moment of anger, he rebels. He pulls out his sword, and he's about to kill Caspian because he wants control, when all of a sudden, King Peter and King Edmund burst into the room, and they save the day. When Truffle Hunter said that our help might be standing at the door, he spoke better than he knew, because they really were standing at the door, sent by Aslan himself. Truffle Hunter was right. And when King Peter goes to commend Truffle Hunter the badger for his faithfulness and his devotion and his trust, Truffle Hunter says, "It's no credit to me, Your Majesty. I'm a beast and we don't change. What's more, I'm a badger and we hold on." Listen, you may feel like help is never going to come. You may feel like I've been waiting and longing and hoping for so long. It's never going to happen. It's never going to come. The best we can do maybe now is maybe make as good a life for ourselves as we can without Jesus. Because maybe when I was a kid I believed all that stuff, but now I'm living in the real world. Hope means ignoring reality. It means pretending my elvish longings are real, even though I know they're not. Let's make as good a life as we can for ourselves without Jesus. Friends, your King is standing at the door. You can pay attention. You can hold on. Pay attention to reality. For your King is even now waiting to come and rescue you. The grace of Jesus means that it changes the way you see others, it changes the way you see yourself, and especially the grace of Jesus gives you a hope that you can hang on to. You can be a badger and hold on to Jesus, because on the cross, Jesus held on to you. Would you pray with me? Father, we praise you today that your promise is real, that we can count on you, that we can hold on to you, that we can trust you. And we thank you especially, Lord, that you have set us free from all the ways we try to earn and perform our ways into your love and into your presence. We thank you that you have set us free through Jesus from the performance traps and the exhaustion and the hurrying and the rushing and the always constantly trying to impress people and worrying about what they think about us. Lord, help us to pay more and more attention to the grace of your cross, to the grace of your resurrection. Help us, we pray, to trust in you, to hold on to you, to wait for you, and to know that you're standing at the door and that you will not delay, that you always keep your promises, Lord. For we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.